Ready for a deep dive into something that might surprise you? We're going to dig into the world of women in educational leadership. You'd think a field, dominated by women would naturally see them rise to the top, right?
That's where the head scratching begins, yeah.
It's almost like looking at two different worlds. On the one hand, you've got classrooms full of incredible female educators shaping young minds. But then you glance up at the administration building.
And it's a different story.
Totally.
We're talking about a system where less than one-third of school district superintendents are women.
Less than one-third.
Less than one-third.
That number really struck me, too. It makes you wonder, with so many women working in education, why aren't we seeing more of them in these leadership positions? And it's not just a nice-to-have kind of thing, is it?
Absolutely not. This isn't just about, equality for equality's sake. This is about ensuring that the people making decisions about education, about our kids' futures, reflect the diversity of the students and teachers they serve. And the pandemic, as disruptive as it was, presented a real opportunity for change, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It felt like a reset button, a chance to rebuild systems in a more equitable way.
You'd hope so, right?
Yeah.
The Great Resignation saw this wave of superintendents leaving their positions. But here's the kicker. New data shows that more often than not, those positions were filled by men.
So the system essentially just, cloned itself.
In a way, yeah. And that highlights a crucial point. This isn't about a lack of qualified, capable women, not even close. This report digs into the real obstacles they face, and I have to say, it was eye-opening, even for me.
Okay, let's unpack these obstacles. What are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with the ever-present issue of gender bias. You might be surprised to learn that even during performance reviews, there's a significant difference in how leadership potential is discussed. Boards are 4 times more likely to focus on this with men, subtly reinforcing the idea that leadership is expected from them but questioned in women.
It's like that old saying, men are praised for being assertive, women are criticized for being bossy.
Yeah.
Same behavior, different interpretations based on gender.
Exactly. And this bias goes beyond perceptions. Think about the kind of feedback people receive. Men are twice as likely to get positive feedback and 4 times more likely to receive feedback that focuses on development and growth rather than criticism compared to their female counterparts. So not only are they being judged differently, they're also being given more encouragement and opportunities to improve.
It's like they're getting nudged up the ladder while women are left to figure out the climbing gear on their own.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of figuring things out, let's talk about the lack of flexibility in the system. We know many women end up shouldering a larger share of family responsibilities, and the demanding, often inflexible structure of education leadership doesn't exactly make that easy.
It's a demanding job, no question. Long hours, pressure from all sides, tough to balance with anything, let alone raising a family. It's true. And then there's this issue of the biased pipeline that the report dives into. Can you elaborate on that a bit? What do they mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so it's not about outright discrimination as much as it is about the subtle ways in which career paths in education, often unintentionally, end up giving men a head start.
Interesting. Tell me more about that.
Think of it like this. Men are more likely to be coached and mentored along a trajectory that naturally leads to the superintendency. They're encouraged to climb that ladder, moving from teacher to principal to district leadership.
While women might be encouraged to take a different route.
Precisely. It's not uncommon for women to be steered towards roles that, while incredibly important, don't necessarily provide the same level of district-wide experience and visibility needed to land that top job.
I see. So it's almost like an unintentional detour on the leadership journey.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the informal networks, the coaching trees, as the report calls them. Men are often part of these networks where they support each other's careers, make introductions, open doors.
Creating a bit of an old boys club scenario.
It can feel that way, yes. And these networks, while not always intentionally exclusive, do end up creating an additional hurdle for women to overcome.
So you've got this combination of factors at play, the bias, the lack of flexibility, this uneven playing field from the start. It's almost like women have to work twice as hard to get halfway there.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And as if all of that weren't enough, let's not forget the persistent pay gap in education.
Right, because we can't talk about attracting the best talent if we're not willing to compensate them fairly. What did the report have to say about that?
Well, on average, female superintendents earn about, let's say, $20,000 to $30,000 less than their male counterparts. And it gets even more interesting when you look at the state level.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What did they find?
The report found that a majority of elected state superintendent positions, which tend to come with a lower salary than appointed roles, are held by women.
Okay.
And to add insult to injury, those women are still paid less than men in the same position.
Wow. Paid less for a job that already has a lower salary. It's mind-boggling. You'd think with all the evidence out there about the benefits of diverse leadership, things would be moving faster.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? And here's the thing. Even when women manage to overcome these obstacles and make it to the final stages, bias still rears its head in the hiring process itself.
You're kidding. They've jumped through all these hoops and they still face a disadvantage. Give me an example.
Well, the report found that men are twice as likely to be hired externally for superintendent roles, meaning they're often coming in from outside the district,
Okay.
while women are more often hired from within.
So it's like women have to prove themselves within the system, while men get to swoop in with their shiny resumes.
It's a common pattern, unfortunately, and it plays into this idea that women need to have more experience, more qualifications to even be considered.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. It's no wonder so many talented women might get discouraged along the way.
It's true. And then there's the confidence gap. The report talks about how, because of societal expectations and norms, men and women often approach things like job descriptions very differently.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Men see a requirement they don't meet and they think, no problem, I'll learn on the job. Women, on the other hand, we tend to be more cautious, more self-critical.
Precisely. And that self-doubt, often ingrained from a young age, can prevent women from even putting themselves forward as candidates in the first place.
Okay, so we've laid out the challenge. A system riddled with bias, a lack of flexibility, uneven playing fields, and this persistent confidence gap. What I appreciate about this report, though, is that it doesn't just point out the problems. It offers a path forward. Right. It gives us a playbook to actually address these issues. What does that look like?
You're right. It's not just about highlighting the problems. It's about finding solutions. And this report lays out some really concrete strategies for transforming the landscape of educational leadership.
I'm ready for some optimism. Hit me with it. What needs to change?
First and foremost, we need to create much more intentional support systems for women in these roles. And we need to go beyond traditional mentorship.
Okay, I like where this is going. Mentorship is great, but what are we talking about here?
Think sponsorship, active advocacy for women's advancement, opening doors, putting their names forward for those high visibility, high impact opportunities.
It's about being their champion, not just their cheerleader.
Well, exactly. And the report actually shares a really inspiring example of this. It talks about Dr. Kyla Johnson-Trammell, the superintendent of Oakland Unified School District. She credits a former superintendent who actively served as her sponsor with coaching her through those tough early years and creating opportunities for growth that might not have otherwise been available to her.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Imagine the ripple effect if every aspiring female leader had someone like that in their corner. It really makes you think about, the hidden figures in so many fields who are just like waiting for that chance to shine. And having that support, that guidance can make all the difference. But the report doesn't stop there, does it?
Yeah.
What are some other ways to level the playing field?
Well, sponsorship is huge, but it's not enough on its own.
Right.
The report also highlights the importance of on-the-job coaching, especially for those in the superintendent role.
Okay.
It's a demanding job. You're always on, and having that targeted support can be invaluable.
Like having a trusted advisor in your corner, someone who's been there, done that, and can offer guidance and support tailored to your specific challenges.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's the power of networks. The report talks about the importance of creating spaces specifically for women in educational leadership to connect, share their experiences, learn from one another.
I'm all about that. There's something so powerful about women, supporting women, sharing their wisdom, lifting each other up.
Absolutely. It can make all the difference in building confidence, navigating challenges, creating a sense of community.
Yeah.
Remember that Women Leading Ed Summit we mentioned earlier? That's a perfect example of this in action.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about support systems, sponsorship, coaching, networking.
Yeah.
What about the hiring process itself? Any suggestions there?
You bet. The report is very clear on this point. We need to rethink how we recruit and select superintendents, period.
Where do we even begin?
Well, for starters, let's diversify those search committees. It's simple math. You can't expect a homogenous group to prioritize diversity in their candidate pool.
You're preaching to the choir. Representation matters. If everyone in the room looks the same, thinks the same, chances are they're going to gravitate towards candidates who reflect that.
It's human nature. And beyond that, the report really pushes for standardizing the hiring process, to reduce the chance of bias creeping in.
Okay.
That means structured interviews, clear rubrics, and getting rid of those vague, subjective questions that leave too much room for interpretation.
So taking out the guesswork, making it more objective, more about merit, and less about gut feeling.
Exactly. And here's a big one that often gets overlooked: family-friendly policies.
You're talking about flexible work arrangements, paid family leave, affordable childcare, those sorts of things.
Exactly. And this isn't just a women's issue. When we create workplaces that support families, everyone benefits.
Right.
And the data supports this. There's actually a strong correlation between things like paternity leave and increased female representation on boards.
That's interesting. I'd love to know more about that.
Well, the thinking is that when men feel empowered to take time for family, it breaks down those traditional gender roles and expectations, creating more space for women to step into leadership positions without feeling like they have to choose between their careers and their families.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about creating a cultural shift that benefits everyone.
Absolutely. And speaking of shifting the culture, transparency and accountability are crucial. The report suggests that districts should be setting public goals for gender diversity in leadership, and then, importantly, tracking their progress and being held accountable for those goals.
I love that idea of a certificate of excellence that they mentioned, for districts that meet certain standards.
Yeah.
A little friendly competition never hurt, right?
Exactly. It's a great way to incentivize progress and acknowledge those who are truly walking the walk.
And of course, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, the pay gap. The report doesn't shy away from addressing this, does it?
Not at all. The message is clear: pay women the same as men for the same work. Full stop.
It's 2024. It shouldn't even be a conversation anymore. But in the meantime, they did mention some interesting tools, like a self-assessment pay calculator. Can you tell me more about that?
Absolutely. It's essentially a tool that empowers women to advocate for themselves.
Okay.
They can plug in their experience, their qualifications, the requirements of the position, and it calculates a salary range based on real data, removing gender from the equation.
So they can go into those salary negotiations armed with the information they need to ensure they're not being lowballed.
Right. Knowledge is power, and this gives women the data they need to negotiate fairly and confidently.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today, from those eye-opening statistics to the systemic barriers women in educational leadership face, and, thankfully, to a set of concrete, actionable steps we can take to start closing that gap. It feels like this conversation goes beyond just education, though, wouldn't you say?
100%. It's about recognizing these patterns of bias, these systemic inequities in all aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
In our workplaces, our communities, even our own personal networks.
It's about being aware of those subtle ways in which bias can creep in,
Mm-hmm.
and then making a conscious effort to challenge those biases and create a more level playing field for everyone.
Exactly. And for you listening, as you go about your day, I'd encourage you to think about what resonated with you today.
Mm-hmm.
What's one small step, no matter how small, that you could take to create a more equitable world for women in leadership?
Because even those seemingly small actions, those everyday moments of courage and allyship, can have a ripple effect.
It's about speaking up, challenging the status quo, and mentoring and sponsoring those coming up behind us.
It's about being the change we want to see in the world.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Hit us with it.
The report is full of solutions, which is fantastic, but it does beg a deeper question. What is it about the very nature of leadership, especially in fields like education, that still seems to resist gender balance?
Good.
What are the underlying beliefs and structures that continue to perpetuate these inequities, even when we're actively trying to dismantle them? Food for thought.
Wow, a lot to unpack there. This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you, as always, for sharing your expertise. And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Until next time.